Now let's begin. Aaron Owens had learned to find peace in the small things. The way his 6-year-old daughter Charlotte giggled when he made pancakes shaped like rabbits. The afternoon light filtering through the windows of his modest woodworking shop. The smell of cedar and oak as he carved furniture that would outlive him. For 3 years, this had been his life, quiet, deliberate, far removed from the world he'd left behind. He stood at his workbench that Tuesday morning, running sandpaper along the curved arm of a rocking chair, when his phone buzzed. The screen showed Diane's number. His ex-wife rarely called anymore, not since the divorce 2 years ago. Their communication had dwindled to brief text exchanges about Charlotte's pickup times. Diane. Aaron. Her voice was tight, strained. I need to tell you something. Dad's taking Charlotte to Vermont for 2 weeks. We're leaving tomorrow. His hand stilled on the wood. What are you talking about? I have her this weekend. It's in the custody agreement. Plans changed. There was something hollow in her tone, rehearsed. This is a family matter. She needs time with her grandfather. Her grandfather? Aaron set down the sandpaper, his jaw tightening. Patrick Roberts hasn't spent 2 consecutive hours with Charlotte since she was born. What's really going on? Silence stretched between them. In the background, he heard a man's voice, deep, commanding. Patrick, Dad thinks it's best, Diane finally said. Charlotte needs stability, and with your situation, he wants to make sure she's taken care of. My situation? Aaron's voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the workbench. I run a successful business. I've never missed a support payment. I've never been late for a pickup. What exactly is my situation? You make furniture, Aaron. The words came faster now, less rehearsed. Dad's concerned about her future, about what kind of life you can really provide. And there it was. Patrick Roberts, real estate mogul, with his waterfront properties and country club memberships, had finally decided to play the wealth card. Aaron had expected this, just not so blatantly. Put him on, Aaron said quietly. Aaron, don't. Put him on. The phone rustled. Then Patrick's voice filled the line, smooth and satisfied. Aaron, good to hear from you. You're not taking my daughter anywhere. Patrick chuckled, the sound like ice in expensive scotch. I'm not taking her. My daughter is taking her. Diane has full discretion over Charlotte's schedule during her custody time. Check your agreement. Aaron's mind raced through the document he'd signed 2 years ago. Patrick was technically right. There was flexibility built in for unexpected circumstances during each parent's designated time. 2 weeks in Vermont isn't an unexpected circumstance, Aaron said. It's a deliberate attempt to disrupt the custody arrangement. Sue me if you want. Patrick's voice turned sharp, amused. You'll never afford a lawyer good enough to win. And frankly, Aaron, maybe it's time we revisited the custody situation entirely. Charlotte deserves better than weekends in a sawdust-filled workshop. The line went dead. Aaron stood in the silence of his shop, surrounded by half-finished furniture and the life he'd carefully constructed. 3 years ago, he'd walked away from everything, the reputation, the cases, the identity that had consumed him. He'd wanted peace. He'd wanted to be present for Charlotte in a way his own father never was. But Patrick Roberts had just made a critical mistake. He didn't know who Aaron Owens really was. The custody agreement arrived via email that evening, along with a formal notice from Patrick's attorney. Aaron read it twice, his expression unchanging. The language was aggressive, threatening. They were filing for an emergency modification of custody, citing concerns about the minor child's welfare and the father's inability to provide adequate financial stability. Aaron sat in his small home office, the room lined with woodworking magazines and sketches for furniture designs. On the bottom shelf of his bookcase, hidden behind a collection of old novels, was a leather briefcase he hadn't opened in 3 years. He pulled it out now, feeling its familiar weight. Inside were documents he'd thought he'd never need again. Bar certifications under 3 different names. A laptop with encrypted files containing 15 years of case law, strategies, victories. And a phone, a separate device he'd kept charged but silent, the one that connected to a world he'd abandoned. He powered it on. 47 missed calls, hundreds of emails, requests for consultations, offers for partnerships, desperate pleas from people who'd heard the rumors of the shadow counsel, the anonymous legal mind who'd never lost a case, who worked in the shadows of the justice system, taking on impossible situations and turning them around. Aaron Owens had been many people in his life. He'd been Marcus Vale, the defense attorney who'd gotten a death row inmate exonerated. He'd been David Sterling, the prosecutor who'd taken down a corrupt pharmaceutical company. He'd been a dozen other identities, each one carefully constructed, each one designed to win cases that others deemed unwinnable. But he'd gotten tired. Tired of the games, the manipulation, the constant performance. When Charlotte was born, he'd made a choice. He'd buried the Shadow Council and become just Aaron, just a father who wanted to make toys and furniture and be home for dinner. Now, as he scrolled through the messages, one name caught his attention. Preston Hendricks, the top attorney in the state, the man who handled cases for governors and CEOs. 3 years ago, Aaron had demolished one of Hendricks' cases in an appeals court under the name Jonathan Cross. Hendricks never knew who'd beaten him, but the loss had been brutal, public, career-damaging. And according to the letterhead on Patrick's legal notice, Preston Hendricks was now representing Patrick Roberts. Aaron allowed himself a small smile. He spent the night going through Patrick's background. It wasn't hard to find information. The man loved publicity. Patrick Roberts, founder of Roberts Development Corporation, had built his fortune on luxury condos and commercial properties along the coast. He was 63, twice divorced, with 3 children from his first marriage. Diane was the youngest. But as Aaron dug deeper, patterns emerged. Lawsuits from former business partners, all settled quietly out of court. Complaints from tenants about unsafe living conditions, buried under layers of legal paperwork. A suspicious fire at one of his properties 10 years ago that had been ruled accidental despite eyewitness accounts suggesting otherwise. Patrick Roberts was a man who used money and lawyers to make problems disappear. He believed in power, in leverage, in the idea that everyone had a price or a breaking point. He'd never face someone like Aaron. At 2 a.m, Aaron drafted his response. He filed it himself through the court system, representing himself pro se. The document was precise, clinical, citing case law and procedural requirements that would force an expedited hearing. He requested emergency intervention to prevent Charlotte from leaving the state, argued that the proposed Vermont trip violated the spirit of the custody agreement, and demanded a full hearing on the modification request. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He made a call to an old contact, a private investigator named one Fletcher who'd helped him on dozens of cases. One had specialized in finding what people wanted to keep hidden. "I need everything on Patrick Roberts," Aaron said when Juan answered. "Financial records, business dealings, personal life. Everything." "Aaron Owens?" Juan's voice was surprised, then amused. "Thought you retired, man. Heard you were making chairs or something." "Rocking chairs. And I did retire." Aaron looked at the photo of Charlotte on his desk, her gap-toothed smile, her eyes bright with trust. "But some people don't know when to leave well enough alone." "This personal?" "Very." "Then I'm in. Give me 48 hours. The court hearing was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. Patrick's attorney, Preston Hendricks, filed an objection to the expedited timeline, but the judge, a woman named in Schwartz who'd been on the bench for 20 years, granted it anyway. Emergency custody matters took precedence. Aaron spent those 3 days preparing. He didn't go to his workshop, didn't answer calls from concerned customers. He lived in his office, surrounded by case files and legal briefs, building his strategy the way a general plans a campaign. On Thursday night, Juan sent over his preliminary findings. Aaron read through them, his expression growing darker with each page. Patrick Roberts wasn't just wealthy and arrogant. He was dangerous. 10 years ago, a young woman named Kristen Moody had worked as an assistant at Roberts Development. She'd filed a harassment complaint, then suddenly withdrawn it and left the state. One had tracked her down. She was living in Oregon now, still afraid to talk. 5 years ago, a whistleblower named Ross Schaefer had tried to expose safety violations at one of Patrick's construction sites. The complaint had been dismissed after Schaefer was arrested on what appeared to be fabricated drug charges. He'd lost his job, his reputation, everything. And 3 years ago, just before Aaron's divorce from Diane, Patrick had personally intervened in a business dispute where a former partner, Leo Christensen, had threatened to sue over unpaid profits. Leo had backed down after his teenage son was mysteriously assaulted outside their home. No arrests were ever made. Patrick Roberts didn't just win. He destroyed anyone who challenged him. Aaron sat back in his chair, fingers steepled, mind working through the implications. This wasn't just about custody. This was about control. Patrick saw Charlotte as leverage, a way to bend Aaron to his will, or simply erase him from the picture entirely. But Patrick had made one critical error in his assessment. He thought Aaron was weak because he'd chosen a simple life. He thought financial power was the only power that mattered. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, Patrick Roberts would learn exactly how wrong he was. The courthouse was an imposing granite structure in downtown Portland, all marble columns and echoing hallways that seemed designed to intimidate. Aaron arrived early, wearing his only suit, a simple charcoal gray he'd bought for his father's funeral years ago. He carried a single leather portfolio and a calm expression that revealed nothing. Preston Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later with an entourage. 2 junior associates, a paralegal carrying boxes of files, and Patrick Roberts himself, dressed in a $1,000 suit and radiating confidence. Diane walked beside her father, her eyes downcast, looking smaller than Aaron remembered. They gathered in the hallway outside courtroom 4. Patrick saw Aaron and smiled, the expression predatory. "Representing yourself?" Patrick said loud enough for others to hear. "How quaint. This should be over quickly." Aaron didn't respond. He simply looked at Patrick with the same level gaze he'd used in 100 courtrooms, the look that said, "I know something you don't." Preston Hendricks noticed. The attorney was in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that came from decades of winning. He glanced at Aaron, then at his client, then back at Aaron. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or just instinct. "Mr. Owens," Hendricks said, extending a hand. "Preston Hendricks. I'm representing Mr. Roberts in this matter." Aaron shook his hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Hendricks. You filed some interesting motions. Very precise legal work for someone representing himself. I read a lot." Hendricks' eyes narrowed slightly. He opened his mouth to say something else, but the bailiff called them into the courtroom. Judge Schwartz was a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and story the legal system had to offer. She reviewed the filings, then looked up at both parties. "This is an emergency hearing on Mr. Roberts' motion to modify custody and Mr. Owens' motion to prevent the minor child from leaving the state," she said. "Mr. Hendricks, you're seeking to take the child to Vermont for 2 weeks during your client's daughter's custody time, correct?" "That's correct, Your Honor." Hendricks stood, commanding the room. "Ms. Roberts wishes to take her daughter to visit family property in Vermont. This falls well within her discretionary authority during her designated custody periods." "And Mr. Owens objects?" Aaron stood. "I do, Your Honor. This isn't a spontaneous family visit. This is the first step in a planned effort to relocate the child permanently and undermine the custody agreement. Mr. Roberts has made his intentions clear. He believes I'm unfit as a father and intends to use his financial resources to take my daughter from me." Patrick leaned forward in his seat, whispering something to Hendricks. The attorney nodded. "Your Honor," Hendricks said smoothly, "my client's son-in-law is being dramatic. Mr. Roberts is simply a concerned grandfather who wants what's best for Charlotte. The child currently splits time between her mother's comfortable home and her father's workshop. Mr. Owens makes furniture for a living. While that's admirable, it doesn't provide the kind of stability and opportunity a child deserves." Judge Schwartz's expression didn't change. "Mr. Owens' profession isn't on trial here, counsel. Does your client have evidence of unfitness or danger to the child?" "We're in the process of gathering documentation, Your Honor. But the Vermont trip is unrelated to the custody modification. Ms. Roberts has the right." "The Vermont property is owned by Mr. Roberts," Aaron interrupted. "Not Ms. Roberts. And I've obtained the enrollment records from the private school in Burlington that Mr. Roberts contacted last week, inquiring about mid-year enrollment for a 6-year-old girl." The courtroom went silent. Hendricks' head snapped toward Patrick, whose face had gone rigid. "Your Honor," Aaron continued, pulling documents from his portfolio, "I have proof that this family visit is actually a planned relocation. Mr. Roberts intends to keep my daughter in Vermont and fight the custody battle from there, using his resources to make it impossible for me to see her." Judge Schwartz took the documents, reviewing them carefully. "Mr. Hendricks?" Preston Hendricks had gone very still. He looked at the papers Aaron had submitted, then at his client. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Your Honor, I was not aware of these enrollment inquiries. If they exist, They may be precautionary on my client's part. Precautionary? Judge Schwartz raised an eyebrow. Counsel, this looks like an end run around the custody agreement. I'm inclined to grant Mr. Owens' emergency motion. Your Honor, please, Hendricks said. My client is a respected businessman with deep ties to this community. He's not trying to kidnap his granddaughter. He simply wants. What your client wants, Aaron said quietly, is irrelevant. The custody agreement is between me and my ex-wife. Mr. Roberts has no legal standing here, and his pattern of behavior suggests he's willing to manipulate the system to get what he wants. Hendricks turned to look at Aaron fully now, and something shifted in his expression. The confident attorney who'd walked in began to see something he hadn't expected. The way Aaron spoke, the precise language, the timing, the control of the courtroom. It was too practiced, too perfect for someone who'd never litigated before. Mr. Owens, Judge Schwartz said, you argue your case well, but I need to hear from Ms. Roberts. Ma'am, please approach. Diane stood slowly, looking like she wanted to disappear. She walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ms. Roberts, the judge said gently, is it your intention to relocate your daughter to Vermont? Diane's eyes flicked to her father, then to Aaron. We just wanted to visit. That's all. Did you know about the school enrollment inquiry? My father mentioned it. As a backup plan. In case. In case what? Diane's voice dropped to almost a whisper. In case the custody modification goes through. Dad thinks Charlotte would have better opportunities there. Better schools. Better everything. And what do you think? For a moment, Diane was silent. Then she looked at Aaron, really looked at him, and something crumbled in her expression. I think my father convinced me that Aaron wasn't enough. That our daughter deserved more than a woodworker could provide. But, her voice broke. But Charlotte's happy with Aaron. She loves him. And I let Dad talk me into this. Patrick stood abruptly. Diane, don't. Mr. Roberts, sit down. Judge Schwartz said sharply. You're not a party to this proceeding. But Patrick was past listening. My granddaughter deserves the best. Not some burned-out dropout who plays with wood all day. Burned out. Aaron's voice cut through the courtroom, quiet, but with an edge that made everyone turn. He looked directly at Patrick Roberts, and for the first time, allowed a hint of something dark and dangerous to show in his eyes. Is that what you think I am? I know exactly what you are, Patrick sneered. A failure. A man who couldn't hack it in the real world. Aaron smiled then, cold and precise. Mr. Roberts, do you know what I did before I became a woodworker? I don't care. You should. Aaron turned to Hendricks. Counselor, you look like you're starting to suspect something. Do you want to tell your client? Or should I? Preston Hendricks had gone pale. He was staring at Aaron like he'd seen a ghost, pieces falling into place in his mind. You can't be. Can't be what? Patrick demanded. Your Honor, Hendricks said, his voice suddenly unsteady. I need to request a brief recess. Denied, Judge Schwartz said, leaning forward with interest. Mr. Owens, please continue. Aaron reached into his portfolio and pulled out a document. Mr. Hendricks and I have met before, in a manner of speaking. 3 years ago, he represented a pharmaceutical company in an appeals case. The opposing counsel was listed as Jonathan Cross. That was me. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Preston Hendricks sank into his chair, his face ashen. Before that, Aaron continued, his voice carrying easily through the room. I was Marcus Vale, David Sterling, and half a dozen other identities. I specialized in impossible cases. I worked in the shadows because I didn't care about credit or fame. I cared about winning. The legal community called me the Shadow Counsel. In 15 years, I never lost a case. Patrick Roberts stared at him, comprehension dawning slowly, like a man watching his world collapse. I retired 3 years ago, Aaron said. I wanted peace. I wanted to be present for my daughter. I thought that part of my life was over. He looked directly at Patrick. But you made a mistake, Mr. Roberts. You threatened to take my daughter from me. You challenged me to a legal fight, assuming I couldn't afford to win. He stepped closer to Patrick's table, his voice dropping to something cold and final. I am the fight. And this. He gestured around the courtroom. This is just the beginning. You wanted to discuss custody in court? Let's discuss it. Let's discuss everything. Judge Schwartz rapped her gavel once. Mr. Owens, I'm granting your emergency motion. The child will not leave the state. As for the custody modification, she looked at Patrick Roberts with an expression of pure disdain. I'm dismissing that motion with prejudice. This hearing is adjourned. As the room cleared, Preston Hendricks approached Aaron in the hallway, away from his client. I should have known, Hendricks said quietly. The filings were too perfect. Too strategic. You played me. I didn't have to play you, Aaron said. Your client's arrogance did that. I just showed up. What happens now? Aaron's expression was unreadable. Now? Now I make sure Patrick Roberts understands the consequences of threatening my family. You should probably advise him to drop this entire matter and walk away. He won't. You humiliated him in there. I know. Aaron's smile was thin and dangerous. That's what I'm counting on. Preston Hendricks looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. I've been practicing law for 30 years. I thought I'd seen everything. You have, Aaron said. You just didn't recognize it until now. As Hendricks walked away, Aaron turned to find Diane standing nearby, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Aaron. Dad said. He convinced me. I know. Aaron's voice softened. Patrick's good at that. But Diane, you need to decide right now. Are you with him or with Charlotte? Because this isn't over. Patrick won't accept what happened in there. He's going to escalate. I don't know what to do. Figure it out fast. For Charlotte's sake. He walked past her, heading for the exit. Outside, in the bright afternoon sun, Aaron felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. The weight of being someone other than just a simple woodworker. The weight of the battles ahead. Patrick Roberts thought this was about money and power. But he'd just declared war on someone who understood a different kind of power entirely. And Aaron intended to teach him exactly what that meant. Juan Fletcher's full report arrived the next morning, delivered via encrypted email to Aaron's secure laptop. Aaron sat in his home office, coffee growing cold beside him, as he read through 200 pages of meticulously documented evidence. Patrick Roberts' empire was built on a foundation of intimidation, corruption, and careful destruction of anyone who got in his way. But one had found something else, a pattern that Aaron recognized from his years as the Shadow Counsel. Patrick didn't just crush his enemies. He enjoyed it. There was a psychological profile here, a man who needed to dominate, to prove his superiority at every turn. The Kristen Moody case was particularly damning. One had finally convinced her to talk, and she provided a sworn statement detailing Patrick's harassment and the threats he'd made when she considered legal action. He'd told her no one would believe her, that he had judges and lawyers in his pocket, that he'd destroy her career and reputation if she didn't disappear. She'd been 23 years old. Ross Schaefer's story was even worse. The whistleblower had been trying to expose that one of Patrick's construction sites had been using substandard materials, risking the safety of future residents. Patrick had framed him for drug possession, planted evidence, and used his connections in the police department to make it stick. Schaefer had spent 6 months in jail before the charges were quietly dropped, but by then, his life was ruined. And Leo Christensen, the former business partner, one had found hospital records for his son, a 17-year-old boy who'd been beaten so severely he needed reconstructive surgery on his jaw. The assault had happened 2 days after Leo threatened legal action against Patrick. No arrests, no suspects, but a clear message. Aaron sat back, his jaw tight. This wasn't just about custody anymore. Patrick Roberts was a predator who'd been operating unchecked for decades, using wealth and fear to stay untouchable. The Shadow Counsel had taken down people like this before, but always carefully, always through the legal system, always playing by at least some of the rules. This time felt different. His phone rang. An unknown number, but Aaron answered it. Mr. Owens? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. My name is Isaac Pierce. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Patrick Roberts in a new matter. My client wishes to file a civil lawsuit against you for defamation and emotional distress resulting from false allegations made in court yesterday. Aaron almost laughed. Patrick's suing me for telling the truth about his school enrollment inquiries. Among other things, my client feels you intentionally misrepresented his intentions to damage his reputation. Your client committed perjury through his daughter and attempted to circumvent a legal custody agreement. Tell him to bring the lawsuit. I'd be happy to put him under oath and ask him about Kristen Moody, Ross Schaefer, and Leo Christensen. There was a pause. I don't know what you're talking about. Your client does. Ask him. Then ask yourself if you really want to represent someone like Patrick Roberts. Aaron hung up. An hour later, Patrick himself called, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You think you're clever? Patrick said. You think one court appearance changes anything? I have resources you can't imagine. I have lawyers, investigators, connections. And I have the truth, Aaron interrupted, along with documentation of every illegal thing you've done for the past 20 years. So here's what's going to happen. Patrick, you're going to drop this custody fight. You're going to leave Charlotte alone. You're going to leave me alone. And you're going to disappear from our lives. Or what? Or I destroy you. Not in court. Not through legal channels. I dismantle everything you've built, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the pathetic, cruel man underneath. Patrick laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. You can't touch me. I'm untouchable. Aaron's voice went cold. That's what they all think. Right up until the moment they realize they're not. Drop this, Patrick. Walk away while you still can. Go to hell. The line went dead. Aaron sat in the silence of his office, knowing he'd just crossed a line. He'd issued a threat, made it personal. The old Aaron, the shadow counsel, would have been more subtle. But this wasn't about winning a case anymore. This was about protecting his daughter from a man who saw people as objects to be controlled. He spent the weekend with Charlotte, taking her to the park, making her favorite meals, reading bedtime stories. She was innocent to all of this, happy and trusting. When she hugged him goodnight, Aaron felt the weight of what he was about to do settle fully onto his shoulders. Monday morning, he began. The first move was strategic. Aaron filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association against Preston Hendricks, not for anything Hendricks had done, but to create pressure. The complaint alleged that Hendricks had failed to properly vet his client's claims before filing the custody modification, citing the school enrollment evidence as proof of either negligence or knowing participation in a fraudulent action. It was a warning shot. Hendricks would beat the complaint easily, but it would make him think twice about continuing to represent Patrick in any escalation of the legal fight. The second move was more direct. Aaron contacted Kristen Moody personally, explaining who he was and what he was doing. She was terrified at first, but Aaron's reputation preceded him. The shadow counsel was a myth in legal circles, but a powerful one. When he promised her protection, promised that Patrick would never touch her again, she agreed to provide her full testimony. Ross Schaefer was harder. The man had been so thoroughly broken by Patrick's tactics that he initially refused to talk. But when Aaron explained what was at stake, another person's daughter being caught in Patrick's web of control, Schaefer relented. He'd kept evidence, documentation of the construction site violations, copies of communications proving Patrick had known about the safety issues. By Wednesday, Aaron had enough to bury Patrick Roberts in criminal and civil litigation that would take years to resolve and cost millions in legal fees. But he didn't file it. Instead, he waited. Patrick made his next move on Thursday. Diane called, crying, saying her father had cut her off financially, frozen her access to the family accounts, and threatened to sue for custody himself, claiming she was unfit because she'd sided with Aaron in court. He's punishing me, Diane sobbed over the phone. He says I embarrassed him, that I chose you over family. Aaron, I don't know what to do. I can't afford the house without his help. I can't. Come stay here, Aaron said immediately. You and Charlotte both. Until this is resolved. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Patrick wants to isolate you, make you desperate enough to do whatever he says. Don't let him. That evening, Diane arrived with Charlotte and 2 suitcases. Aaron set them up in his guest room, made dinner, and watched as Charlotte showed her mother his workshop with pride, pointing out the rocking chair he'd made for her, the small table and chairs sized just for her. After Charlotte was asleep, Diane sat at Aaron's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Why did you marry me? She asked quietly. We were never right for each other. We were young, Aaron said, and I think we both wanted something the other represented. You wanted someone different from your father's world. I wanted something normal, stable. And then I let him pull me back in. He's your father. That's complicated. Diane looked at him, really looked at him. When we were married, you never talked about your work. I knew you were some kind of lawyer, but you always changed the subject. I thought you were ashamed of failing, of not being successful like Dad. I was hiding, Aaron admitted. The shadow counsel couldn't have a public life. And I was tired of that existence. I wanted to be someone real. Are you still hiding? Aaron thought about that. No, not anymore. Patrick made sure of that. What are you going to do to him? What needs to be done? Diane set down her tea, her expression troubled. He's my father, Aaron. Whatever he's done, whatever he is, he's still my father. I know. And that's why you should stay here, stay out of it. Let me handle this. I can't just. Yes, Aaron said firmly. You can. For Charlotte's sake, you can step back and let me protect both of you. That's what I should have been doing all along. On Friday, Patrick's new attorney, Isaac Pierce, filed the defamation lawsuit as promised. But Aaron had been expecting it. He immediately filed a countersuit, not just defending against the defamation claims, but launching a comprehensive legal assault. He sued Patrick for harassment, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for violating the custody agreement, and for fraud in his attempt to relocate Charlotte. Each claim was backed by meticulous documentation. Each allegation was carefully worded to be defensible and damaging. Aaron had learned long ago that lawsuits weren't just about winning. They were about pressure, about creating multiple fronts that forced your opponent to fight on terrain they didn't control. Within hours of filing, Aaron's phone rang. Preston Hendricks. You're making a mistake, Hendricks said without preamble. Am I? Patrick Roberts is vindictive. You're backing him into a corner. Good. That's where I want him. Aaron, can I call you Aaron? Hendricks' voice shifted, becoming almost pleading. I've looked into your history. All of it. I know what you're capable of. But Patrick doesn't. He just sees you as another obstacle to crush. He's going to come after you with everything he has. Let him. You have a daughter to think about. That, Aaron said coldly, is exactly what I'm thinking about. Patrick threatened her. Everything that happens now is his choice. He can end this anytime by walking away. He won't. Then he'll learn the hard way. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. I'm withdrawing from his case. I won't be part of whatever's coming. Smart choice. After Hendricks hung up, Aaron sat back and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Patrick was now down his best attorney, facing multiple lawsuits, and, if Aaron had read the situation correctly, starting to panic. The trap was working. By Monday of the following week, Patrick Roberts had burned through 3 attorneys. The first, Preston Hendricks, had withdrawn. The second, Isaac Pierce, had lasted 2 days before resigning after reviewing Aaron's countersuit and realizing the scope of evidence against his client. The third, a criminal defense attorney named Chad Lynch, had taken the case for an astronomical retainer and was now discovering exactly why the previous lawyers had fled. Aaron knew this because he'd made it his business to know everything about Patrick's legal team, his finances, his movements. He'd activated old contacts, investigators, and information brokers he hadn't used in years. The Shadow Counsel network had been dormant, but it hadn't disappeared. On Tuesday morning, Aaron received a package via courier. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. Thought you might find this interesting. MV. Marcus Vale. One of Aaron's old aliases, but the signature was real. It was from Miguel Carter, a forensic accountant who'd helped Aaron on white-collar cases years ago. Miguel had clearly heard that the Shadow Counsel was back in action. Aaron plugged in the flash drive. It contained Roberts Development Corporation's internal financial records for the past decade. Records that should have been confidential, protected by attorney-client privilege and corporate security. But Miguel had always been exceptionally good at his job. Aaron spent the next 12 hours analyzing the data. What he found was devastating. Patrick had been systematically defrauding his investors, inflating property values, hiding safety violations, and using shell companies to launder profits offshore. It was criminal enterprise hiding behind the facade of legitimate business. But more than that, Aaron found connections. Payments to police officers, to city council members, to building inspectors. Patrick had built his empire on a foundation of bribery and corruption that touched dozens of public officials. This wasn't just evidence for a civil lawsuit. This was federal crime. Aaron sat back, considering his options. He could turn this over to the FBI, to the federal prosecutors. Let the justice system handle Patrick Roberts through official channels. It would be clean, legal, the right way to do things. But it would also take years. And during those years, Patrick would use every resource to fight, to delay, to make Aaron's life hell. Charlotte would grow up in the middle of a legal war zone. No, Aaron needed something faster, more definitive. He needed to make Patrick destroy himself. The plan came together over the next 2 days. Aaron reached out to every person Patrick had ever wronged: Kristen Moody, Ross Schaefer, Leo Christensen, and a dozen others one had identified. He offered them something they'd never had before: a chance for justice, backed by someone with the resources and reputation to make it stick. One by one, they agreed to come forward. By Thursday, Aaron had sworn statements from 15 victims spanning 20 years. Each statement detailed Patrick's tactics: the threats, the intimidation, the violence. Each one painted a picture of a man who'd operated above the law for so long that he'd forgotten it existed. Aaron compiled everything into a single comprehensive document: nearly 500 pages of evidence, testimony, and documentation. He had his counterpunches ready. Then Patrick made his critical mistake. On Friday afternoon, Charlotte's school called. A man claiming to be her grandfather had tried to pick her up early, saying there was a family emergency. The school, following protocol, had refused and called both parents. Aaron arrived at the school within 10 minutes, his heart pounding. Charlotte was safe, sitting in the principal's office with her teacher, confused about why everyone seemed upset. The man was very insistent. The principal, and Schwartz's sister as it turned out, told Aaron. He had identification showing he was Patrick Roberts. When we refused, he became aggressive. We had to call security. Where is he now? He left. But Mr. Owens, this is serious. We're filing a report with the police about the incident. Aaron knelt down to Charlotte's level, keeping his voice calm. Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay? I'm fine, Daddy. Why did Grandpa try to pick me up? Mommy said you were coming. Grandpa made a mistake. But everything's fine now. That evening, after Charlotte was asleep, Aaron sat with Diane and showed her the security footage from the school. Patrick had been there, had argued with staff, had tried to use his authority and money to override their procedures. He tried to take her, Diane whispered, her face pale. Even after the court ruling, even after everything, he still tried to take her. He doesn't accept losing, Aaron said quietly. And he doesn't understand that some things aren't about winning or losing. They're about what's right. What are you going to do? Aaron looked at her, his expression carved from stone. I'm going to end this. Tomorrow. That night, Aaron made copies of all his evidence. He packaged them carefully, addressing envelopes to the FBI, to the state attorney general, to the IRS, to every regulatory agency and law enforcement body that had jurisdiction over Patrick Roberts' crimes. But he didn't mail them. Instead, on Saturday morning, he called Patrick directly. We need to meet, Aaron said when Patrick answered, his voice tight with rage. Why would I meet with you? Because I'm offering you one last chance to walk away from this with something resembling dignity. Decline, and I promise you'll regret it for whatever remains of your pathetic life. There was a long pause. Then, where? Your office. 1 hour. Come alone. Patrick's office was in a gleaming high-rise overlooking the waterfront, all glass and steel and expensive art that screamed wealth and power. Aaron walked through the lobby in jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a leather satchel, looking completely out of place among the polished business people. The receptionist called up, and Aaron was directed to the top floor. Patrick's office was exactly what Aaron expected: massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that probably cost more than most cars, and walls covered with photos of Patrick shaking hands with politicians, celebrities, power brokers. Patrick stood behind his desk, his face flushed with anger. You have 5 minutes. Aaron set his satchel on the desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. In here is evidence of 20 years of criminal activity: fraud, bribery, witness intimidation, conspiracy, money laundering. I have financial records, testimony from victims, documentation of payments to public officials. Everything. Patrick barely glanced at it. Trying to blackmail me? That's pathetic, even for you. Not blackmail. Fair warning. Aaron pulled out another folder. This contains evidence that you attempted to abduct my daughter yesterday, in violation of a court order. That's a felony, Patrick. That's prison time. I tried to pick up my granddaughter from school. That's not abduction. You tried to take her after a court explicitly prohibited you from interfering with custody. You tried to override school protocol using intimidation. And you did it because you can't accept that you lost. Patrick's jaw tightened. I haven't lost anything. You've lost everything. You just don't know it yet. Aaron pulled out a third folder. These are letters addressed to every federal and state agency with jurisdiction over your crimes. I can mail them today, start an investigation that will destroy Robert's Development Corporation, and put you in prison for the rest of your life." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or," Aaron continued, "you can sign this." He slid a document across the desk. Patrick picked it up, scanning it quickly, his face darkening with each line. "You want me to sign over custody rights? Agree to never contact Charlotte again? Pay reparations to people I don't even know?" Patrick threw the document down. "This is insane. This is justice. For Kristen Moody, who you harassed and threatened. For Ross Schaefer, who you framed and destroyed. For Leo Christensen's son, who you had beaten within an inch of his life. For every person you've crushed under your heel because you thought your money made you untouchable. Those are lies. Unproven allegations. That I can prove in court. Under oath. With witnesses and documentation." Aaron leaned forward. "But I'm giving you a choice, Patrick. Sign this agreement. Make this right, and I keep the evidence private. Refuse, and I bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." Patrick stared at him, hatred radiating from every line of his face. "You self-righteous piece of—" "I'm not righteous," Aaron interrupted. "I'm just a father protecting his daughter. You made this personal. You threatened the one thing in this world I care about more than anything else. So now you get to choose. Do you want to lose just this fight, or do you want to lose everything?" The office fell silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Patrick looked at the document, then at Aaron, then at the folders full of evidence. "I could fight this," Patrick said finally. "I have resources. You have 3 attorneys who've quit in 2 weeks. You have a reputation that's about to be demolished. And you have me, someone who's never lost in 15 years and who now has every reason to make destroying you my life's work." Aaron's voice went flat, final. "You can't win this, Patrick. The only question is how much you lose." Patrick's hands trembled as he picked up the document again. Aaron could see the war happening behind his eyes, the arrogance fighting against the fear, the need to dominate battling with the survival instinct that recognized a predator even more dangerous than himself. "If I sign this," Patrick said slowly, "you'll keep the evidence private?" "Yes, as long as you honor every term of the agreement. The moment you violate it, the moment you contact Charlotte or Diane or try anything against me, everything goes public. And I'll make sure you spend your final years in a federal prison. And the people I supposedly wronged will receive compensation from an escrow account you'll fund. Anonymously. They get justice. You get to pretend you're still the man you claim to be." Patrick looked at the skyline, at his empire spread out below him. For the first time since Aaron had met him, the older man looked old. Defeated. "You planned this from the beginning," Patrick said. "From the moment you walked into that courtroom. You weren't there to defend yourself. You were there to lure me in." "No," Aaron said honestly. "I walked into that courtroom hoping you'd see reason and back down. But when you didn't, when you kept pushing, kept threatening, then yes, I planned this. I researched you. I found everyone you'd hurt. I built a case that's airtight and devastating. Because that's what I do. The Shadow Council." Patrick's voice was bitter. "A father. That's all I wanted to be. A simple woodworker making furniture and raising my daughter. You took that choice away from me." Patrick picked up a pen, his hand shaking slightly. He stared at the document for a long moment, and Aaron could see the exact moment when the man's ego finally surrendered to reality. He signed. Aaron witnessed the signature, then made 2 copies, one for Patrick, one for his files. "The escrow account needs to be funded within 30 days. I'll be monitoring. And Patrick." Aaron paused at the door. "If you ever come near my daughter again, the agreement is void and all of this becomes public. Are we clear?" Patrick didn't answer, just stared out his window at the city he'd ruled for so long. Aaron walked out, carrying the signed agreement, feeling both victory and something darker, the knowledge that he'd just used every tool at his disposal, legal and otherwise, to force a man into submission. The Shadow Council might have retired, but his methods hadn't changed. 3 weeks later, Aaron sat in his workshop, running his hand along the smooth surface of a new rocking chair he'd built. It was cherry wood this time, with delicate carved details along the armrests, birds in flight, reaching for the sky. Charlotte played nearby, building a castle with wooden blocks Aaron had made for her. Diane was in the kitchen of Aaron's house where she and Charlotte had stayed, making dinner. It was a strange new normal, but it was working. The escrow account had been funded. Aaron had verified it personally, then worked with Juan Fletcher to ensure each of Patrick's victims received their compensation. Kristen Moody had cried when she received her check and the letter explaining that her abuser had finally faced consequences. Ross Schaefer had used his money to start a new business, a fresh chance at life. Leo Christensen had paid for his son's remaining medical bills and still had enough left over to secure his family's future. Preston Hendricks had called 2 days ago, ostensibly to check in, but really to satisfy his own curiosity. I've never seen anyone dismantle an opponent that thoroughly without a single formal hearing, Hendricks had said. Patrick Roberts is a shell of himself. He's withdrawn from his company, handed control to a board, and apparently spends his days at his estate, barely leaving. Good, Aaron had replied simply. Was it worth it? Coming out of retirement, exposing yourself? Aaron had thought about that. A wise man once told me that the law isn't about winning. It's about justice. Sometimes you get both. Sometimes you have to choose. And which did you choose? Both. For my daughter's sake. Now, watching Charlotte laugh as her block castle toppled, and she started rebuilding it with determined concentration, Aaron felt certain he'd made the right choice. Diane appeared in the workshop doorway. Dinner's ready. Charlotte, go wash your hands. As Charlotte ran past, Diane lingered. I got a call from my father today. Aaron's hand stilled on the wood. What did he want? To apologize. To me, anyway. He sounded broken. Said he was wrong. That he'd lost perspective. That his need to control everything had cost him the people who mattered most. Do you believe him? Diane was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Maybe he means it. Maybe it's just another manipulation. But either way, I told him I needed distance. That I couldn't have him in my life, or Charlotte's life, until I figured out who I was without his influence. That's brave. It's terrifying. She smiled sadly. But necessary. You were right, Aaron. About a lot of things. I let him control me for so long that I forgot how to make my own choices. You're making them now. Because you showed me it was possible. Because you stood up to him when no one else would. She paused. The divorce, that was my father's idea too. He convinced me you were holding me back, that I deserved someone more ambitious, more successful. I was so stupid. You were influenced by someone you trusted. That's not stupid. That's human. Diane looked at him with an expression Aaron couldn't quite read. Do you think, could we ever? No, Aaron said gently but firmly. We're good co-parents now. Good friends, maybe. But we can't go back, Diane. Too much has happened. She nodded, unsurprised. I know. I just needed to hear it. She turned to leave, then stopped. Thank you, Aaron. For protecting Charlotte. For protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it. After she left, Aaron sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by the furniture he'd built and the life he'd chosen. The Shadow Council was still there, still part of him, but he didn't have to be that person all the time. He could be both, the strategic mind who'd taken down a corrupt businessman, and the father who made wooden toys for his daughter. The phone rang. An unknown number, but Aaron answered it anyway. Mr. Owens? My name is Sergio Fink. I'm an attorney in Seattle. I've heard stories about someone called the Shadow Council. I have a client who's being destroyed by a corrupt corporation, and every lawyer I've consulted says the case is unwinnable. I was hoping. Aaron looked at Charlotte through the window, watching her set the table carefully, placing napkins just so. He thought about the agreement with Patrick, about the evidence locked away in his safe, about the balance he was trying to maintain. I'm retired, Aaron said. I understand. But this case, the corporation is targeting my client's custody of his children. They're using their resources to paint him as unfit, just because he tried to expose their wrongdoing. His kids are 7 and 9. Mr. Owens, I wouldn't call if I wasn't desperate. Aaron closed his eyes. Custody. Children. Another Patrick Roberts in different form. Send me the case files, he heard himself say. I'll review them. No promises. Thank you. Thank you so much. The legal community. There are rumors that the Shadow Council took down Patrick Roberts. That he came out of retirement for a custody case. Is that true? Patrick Roberts took himself down, Aaron said. I just showed him the mirror. After hanging up, Aaron stood in his workshop for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly, shook his head, and went inside for dinner. The Shadow Council had returned, but on his own terms now. Not as an identity to hide behind, but as a tool he could wield when justice demanded it. And if that meant taking on corrupt corporations, crooked businessmen, and anyone else who thought power made them untouchable? Well, they'd learned the same lesson Patrick Roberts had learned. Some people can't be bought, can't be intimidated, and can't be beaten. Because they're not fighting for money or pride. They're fighting for the people they love. And that made all the difference. For months had passed since the confrontation in Patrick's office. Aaron's life had settled into a new rhythm, splitting time between his woodworking shop and the small private practice he'd quietly established in a converted brownstone downtown. He didn't advertise. He didn't need to. Word spread in the legal community about certain kinds of cases that Aaron Owens would take on, and those were the only cases that interested him. Charlotte was thriving. The custody arrangement had been formalized without contest after Patrick's withdrawal, and she spent equal time with both parents now. Diane had gotten a job at a nonprofit, finding her own path away from her father's influence. She'd even started dating someone, a teacher she'd met at Charlotte's school, someone kind and normal and utterly unlike Patrick Roberts. On a Wednesday afternoon in late spring, Aaron was in his workshop finishing a custom dining table when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Preston Hendricks. Aaron answered. "Counselor. Aaron, I hope I'm not interrupting. Just working. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know something. Patrick Roberts died this morning." Aaron set down his sanding block, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. How? Heart attack, apparently. He was at his estate, alone. The housekeeper found him. Hendricks paused. "I thought you should know before it hits the news. Thank you for calling. There's more." His will was read this afternoon. He left everything to charity, education foundations, abuse prevention organizations, programs for at-risk youth. His company has been restructured into a trust that will fund these causes in perpetuity. And there was a letter addressed to you. Aaron frowned. A letter? His attorney is sending it over. But Aaron, I saw Patrick a week before he died. He was different, quieter, almost peaceful. He told me that losing to you was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to see what he'd become. I find that hard to believe. So did I? But the will, the charities, it all seems genuine. Patrick Roberts spent his final months trying to make amends for 40 years of damage. He couldn't fix everything, couldn't undo the harm. But he tried. After the call ended, Aaron sat in his workshop, thinking about Patrick Roberts. The man who'd threatened to take his daughter, who'd built an empire on cruelty and intimidation, who'd made so many people suffer. The letter arrived the next day. Aaron opened it alone in his office, Charlotte at school, Diane at work. Aaron Owens. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. My doctors gave me 6 months 3 weeks ago. Cancer, aggressive and inoperable. I chose not to treat it. I'm not writing to apologize, though I owe you and countless others more apologies than I could give in several lifetimes. I'm writing because you gave me something I never expected, time to see myself clearly. When you walked out of my office that day with the signed agreement, I hated you. I planned revenge, imagined ways to destroy you despite our contract. But as the days passed, as I looked at the evidence you'd compiled, at the list of people I'd hurt, I couldn't escape the truth. I was a monster, not a businessman, not a success story, not the powerful man I'd convinced myself I was. Just a monster who'd used money and fear to hide from my own weakness. You could have destroyed me publicly. The evidence you had would have ruined me, sent me to prison, made me infamous. But you gave me a choice, and in doing so, you gave me the chance to die as something other than what I'd lived as. The charities, the restructuring of my company, it's not redemption. I don't deserve redemption. But it's something. A final act that might do some good, even if it can undo the harm. Thank you for being the father I never was. Thank you for protecting your daughter the way I should have protected mine. And thank you for showing me, at the very end, what real strength looks like. It was never about the money or the power. I know that now. Patrick Roberts. Aaron read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a weary understanding that some battles were more complicated than they appeared. Patrick Roberts had been a villain, had hurt people, had earned every consequence Aaron had delivered. But he'd also been human, capable of change even at the end. That evening, Aaron told Diane about Patrick's death over dinner at her apartment while Charlotte played in her room. He left everything to charity, Aaron explained. Apparently spent his final months trying to make amends. Diane was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. I didn't know he was sick. He never told me. I don't think he told anyone. Should I feel sad? She wiped her eyes. He was my father, but he was also everything you exposed him to be. Is it wrong that I mostly feel relieved? No, Aaron said gently. It's complicated. He was both the man who raised you and the man who tried to steal your daughter. You can feel however you feel. Did he suffer? At the end. Aaron thought about that, about the letter, about the choices Patrick had made in his final months. I think he made peace with it, as much as someone like him could. Later, after Aaron had gone home and Charlotte was asleep, he stood in his workshop looking at the tools and wood that had become his meditation, his escape from the complicated world of law and justice. The Shadow Council had won. Patrick Roberts had been defeated, had changed, had died trying to atone for his sins. By any measure, this should have felt like victory. But Aaron had learned something in his years as a lawyer, something that working with wood had reinforced, that life was more complicated than winning and losing, that justice was messier than courtroom verdicts, that people were capable of both terrible cruelty and unexpected grace. He picked up a piece of walnut he'd been saving for a special project. It was time to build something new, not for a client, not for Charlotte, but for himself. A reminder that even in the darkest wood, with the right tools and enough patience, you could find beauty. 1 year after Patrick Roberts' death, Aaron stood in a newly renovated community center in downtown Portland. The Patrick Roberts Foundation had funded it, part of the trust he'd established, and today was the opening ceremony. The center would provide free legal aid to people who couldn't afford attorneys, offering help with custody cases, landlord disputes, and other civil matters. Aaron had been asked to speak, not as the Shadow Counsel, but as Aaron Owens, a local attorney who'd worked with the foundation to establish the program. Charlotte sat in the front row next to Diane and her boyfriend, Aaron's parents who'd flown in from Arizona, and a handful of Aaron's former clients, including Kristen Moody, Ross Schaefer, and Leo Christensen. They'd all become part of Aaron's extended network, people who understood that justice sometimes came in unexpected forms. My daughter asked me yesterday what I do for work, Aaron began, his voice carrying through the room. I told her I help people who need help. She asked me why. I told her because once, someone helped me when I needed it most. He looked at Charlotte, who was watching him with those bright, trusting eyes. The law can be a weapon or a shield, depending on who wields it. Patrick Roberts understood that. He used it as a weapon for most of his life, hurting people, protecting himself, building an empire on other people's pain. But at the end, he chose to turn it into something different. This center, this foundation, it's his attempt to make the law what it should be. A tool for justice, not power. Aaron paused, gathering his thoughts. I'm not going to stand here and tell you Patrick Roberts was a good man. He wasn't. He caused real harm to real people, some of whom are in this room today. But I will say this, he changed. Not enough, not soon enough, but he changed. And if someone like Patrick Roberts can choose to do better at the end of his life, then maybe there's hope for all of us. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the new center, Preston Hendricks approached Aaron. That was generous, Hendricks said. Given everything Patrick did to you. It wasn't for Patrick, Aaron replied. It was for Charlotte. Someday she'll ask me about her grandfather. I want to be able to tell her something other than that he was a monster who tried to take her from me. And now you can? Now I can tell her he was flawed, that he made terrible choices, but that at the end he tried to make it right. It's not a fairy tale, but it's the truth. Hendricks smiled slightly. The Shadow Counsel has gotten philosophical in his old age. The Shadow Counsel is retired. I'm just Aaron now, a woodworker who occasionally practices law. Is there a difference? Aaron looked at Charlotte, who was showing Diane's boyfriend one of her drawings, a family portrait that included Aaron, Diane, and even a figure labeled Grandpa up in the clouds. Yeah, Aaron said. There's a difference. The Shadow Counsel fought to win. Aaron fights to protect the people he loves. The methods might be similar, but the motivation changes everything. As the afternoon wore on, Juan Fletcher pulled Aaron aside. Got something for you, he said, handing over a thin folder. Did some more digging into Patrick's final months. Thought you should see this. Aaron opened the folder. Inside were bank records showing donations Patrick had made in his last weeks, anonymous contributions to every person he'd wronged, far beyond what the agreement had required. Scholarship funds set up in the names of people he'd destroyed. Medical bills paid for Leo Christensen's son under a fake foundation name. He was trying to fix it, once said. All of it. Couldn't make up for everything. But damn if he wasn't trying. Aaron closed the folder, feeling that complicated mix of emotions again. Keep this confidential. Let people remember him however they need to. You got it, boss. Juan paused. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Giving him the choice to change instead of just destroying him. Not sure I would have. I didn't do it to be kind. I did it because destroying him publicly would have hurt Charlotte more than it helped anyone else. The private agreement gave me what I needed, her safety, and gave him a chance to be something other than a villain. Still, takes a bigger person than me to see it that way. After everyone had left, and the center was locked up for the night, Aaron drove Charlotte home. She was tired, dozing in her car seat, clutching a stuffed rabbit Aaron had carved for her birthday. Daddy, she mumbled, half asleep. Yes, sweetheart. The people at the center said Grandpa helped make it. That's nice. Aaron glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah, baby. It is nice. I wish I could have known him better. Aaron's throat tightened. Me too, Charlotte. Me too. At home, after Charlotte was asleep, Aaron sat at his workbench with the piece of walnut he'd been saving. He'd decided what to make. A music box, something Charlotte could keep her treasures in. Something that would last, that she could pass down to her own children someday. As he worked, carefully shaping the wood, his mind drifted to everything that had happened. The courtroom confrontation, the investigation, the final agreement with Patrick, the letter revealing the man's terminal diagnosis, the foundation, the center, the unexpected redemption. It wasn't a perfect ending. Patrick hadn't lived long enough to truly atone for decades of cruelty. The people he'd hurt still carried scars. Justice, in the pure sense, hadn't been fully served. But Charlotte was safe. Diane was healing. The foundation was helping people who needed it. And Aaron had learned that sometimes the most important victory wasn't destroying your enemy. It was giving them the chance to stop being an enemy at all. The Shadow Council had taught him how to win. Being a father had taught him why winning mattered. And the balance between those two truths, that was what Aaron Owens had become. He finished the rough shape of the music box, running his fingers along the smooth curves, imagining Charlotte's face when she saw it. Tomorrow he'd add the details, the careful inlay work, the hidden compartments. But for tonight, this was enough. Outside, Portland slept under a blanket of stars. In his workshop, Aaron Owens, woodworker, father, and occasionally the Shadow Council, built something beautiful from simple wood, proving that even in the darkest materials, with the right tools and enough care, you could always create light. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.